In a packed Savannah courtroom, 17-year-old Maya Chun faced murder charges for a crime so calculated, so cold-blooded, that even seasoned detectives were left shaken. But the truly horrifying part? Investigators would discover this wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. It was a game, and the victim was just a pawn. The case would ultimately hinge on a single sickening search term that revealed the killer's true intent. Rebecca Morrison was a beloved mother of one, found brutally murdered inside her meticulously kept Savannah home. The viciousness stood in stark contrast to the tranquil historic neighborhood she inhabited. This wasn't just murder, it was personal violence involving both strangulation and multiple stab wounds that spoke to profound, terrifying rage. Savannah prides itself on gentle decorum, a slow-paced life where generations are interconnected through church and local businesses. It's an old southern city dripping with charm, history, and hidden scandals. But open brutality? That happened elsewhere. Rebecca's death shattered the carefully constructed illusion of safety, leaving a permanent stain on the community's consciousness. Rebecca Morrison was by all accounts a pillar of her community and fiercely protective mother to her 13-year-old daughter Emma, a bright, happy child who was the center of Rebecca's world. Friends described Rebecca as the person who organized neighborhood watches, baked for school fundraisers, and always had kind words for everyone. Her life wasn't one of high-risk behavior or dangerous associations. It was PTA meetings, gardening, and unwavering devotion to her child. This made the crime incomprehensible to those who knew her. They struggled to imagine who could harbor such venom for a woman whose defining characteristic was kindness. The central conflict began with a friendship Rebecca had grown increasingly wary of over recent months. Emma had become inseparable from Maya Chun, a 17-year-old from a nearby neighborhood. At first, Rebecca had been welcoming, but Maya's influence soon became a source of deep concern as Emma's grades slipped and her personality changed in unsettling ways. The friendship wasn't just close, it was obsessive, a codependent bond Rebecca recognized as unhealthy and potentially dangerous for her impressionable daughter. Rebecca made the decision any loving parent would. She intervened to end the relationship. She saw it as her duty to protect Emma from an influence she deemed toxic, a friendship pulling her daughter into a world of secrecy and defiance. Tragically, that reasonable protective act would be met not with teenage angst, but with calculated violence no one could have predicted. The plan wasn't spontaneous fury. It was conspiracy born of a shared, twisted narrative between two teenagers who saw Rebecca not as a person, but as an obstacle. Maya Chun and her accomplice decided Rebecca's life was the price of their continued friendship with Emma. They convinced themselves her removal was the only solution, a necessary act to preserve their bond. This horrifying logic, devoid of empathy or proportion, set the stage for murder. On the day of crime, the two teens put their plan into motion with chilling efficiency. They gained entry to the Morrison home under simple pretext, exploiting trust Rebecca hadn't fully revoked yet. The humid Georgia air and scent of blooming magnolia gave no hint of violence about to unfold within those pristine walls. The attack was sudden and overwhelmingly violent, a coordinated assault leaving Rebecca with no chance to defend herself or call for help. They acted with singular brutal purpose, their teenage frames belying the strength and ferocity of their actions. They weren't driven by momentary passion, but by cold execution of a premeditated plot. In those final terrifying moments, Rebecca's life was extinguished by the very teenagers she'd sought to keep away from her child. A final gut-wrenching irony in a story defined by misplaced loyalties and corrupted innocence. Lead Detective Sarah Martinez of Savannah Police was first to arrive, and it was a sight that would stay with her forever. She was a seasoned investigator accustomed to the darker side of human nature festering beneath the city's picturesque facade. Yet the scene in Rebecca Morrison's living room was different, possessing personal cruelty that was deeply unsettling. Evidence of struggle was minimal, suggesting swift, merciless ambush against a woman in the sanctity of her own home. Martinez's initial walkthrough revealed the dual nature of assault, a combination suggesting both coldly planned and passionately executed violence. The ligature indicated desire for control and silence, while frenzied stab wounds pointed to deep-seated explosive rage. This contradiction would become hallmark of the entire case, hinting at complex, deeply disturbed psychology behind the act. The immediate question: who could harbor such lethal grudge against Rebecca Morrison, a woman with no known enemies? Investigation quickly focused on Emma and her controversial friendship with Maya Chun. Neighbors and friends recounted Rebecca's growing concerns, painting a picture of a mother losing her child to negative influence. But Detective Martinez sensed something far darker than simple teenage rebellion. The scale of violence suggested pathology beyond youthful defiance. The breakthrough came when Emma, found safe at a friend's house, was questioned by a child psychologist. The terrified 13-year-old, through tears and fear, spoke of Maya's consuming possessiveness and the strange, intense world she'd created around their friendship. She recounted Maya's furious reaction when told about her mother's ultimatum, describing a chilling promise: "I'll fix it so we can be together forever." It was the missing piece, a direct link between the victim's protective actions and unthinkable consequences that followed. The warrant was served just after dawn at a modest home across town. Maya Chun was taken into custody without incident, her expression a blank canvas of teenage indifference. No sign of fear, no hint of remorse, just calm, almost bored compliance that sent chills down arresting officers' spines. In that moment, they knew they weren't dealing with a scared kid who'd made a terrible mistake. They were in the presence of something else entirely, something cold, calculating, and profoundly broken. The accomplice was arrested within the hour, her story tumbling out in panicked confessions and blame-shifting. She painted Maya as the mastermind, the manipulative force who'd convinced her that murder was justifiable, even noble. But Maya Chun was clearly the center of gravity in this dark constellation. The interrogation of Maya Chun began not with denials or tears, but with unnerving, profound silence. She sat across from Detective Martinez in the stark gray room, posture relaxed, hands resting calmly in her lap. For the first 20 minutes, she simply stared, offering no response to carefully phrased questions, her expression a mixture of boredom and faint amusement. It was classic passive resistance. But in a 17-year-old murder suspect, it felt deeply abnormal, a sign of psyche utterly detached from situation gravity. Martinez had interrogated hundreds of suspects, from panicked first-timers to hardened criminals. But Maya was different. No flicker of fear in her eyes, no sign of adrenaline-fueled anxiety that typically accompanied murder arrests. Instead, placid confidence, almost serene self-assurance that was profoundly unsettling. The turning point came when Martinez calmly placed a photograph on the table, a simple smiling snapshot of Rebecca Morrison taken on family vacation a year earlier. For the first time, Maya's placid demeanor shifted, not into remorse, but into something that looked disturbingly like contempt. A small, almost imperceptible smirk played at her lips as she glanced at the picture. She thought she could get in the way, Maya said, voice even and emotionless. People who get in the way of important things have to be moved. It's simple, really. The confession, when it began, wasn't reluctant admission of guilt, but calm, methodical recounting of a task completed, a problem solved with what she considered unfortunate but necessary force. Once Maya started talking, she did so with chilling, explicit relish for details. She described the planning, weapon choices, and murder execution with detached precision of a student explaining a science project. No hesitation, no emotional distress, only clear, focused memory of every gruesome moment. It quickly became clear Maya wasn't just confessing. She was boasting, using the interrogation room as a stage to showcase cleverness and brutality of her actions. She took particular sadistic pleasure in providing gruesome, unnecessary details specifically to traumatize listening officers. She described the sound of Rebecca's final breath, the precise feeling of knife entering flesh, the look of terror in her victim's eyes, all with the same flat, analytical tone. She watched Martinez's face intently as she spoke, searching for reaction, a flicker of shock or disgust. It was performance of pure psychopathy. At one point, she paused to ask Detective Martinez, "You have kids, right? You'd do anything for them, wouldn't you?" "See, so did she." That was her whole problem. The statement was delivered with faint mocking smile, a twisted attempt to create perverse common ground. Her account left no room for ambiguity about her role as dominant force in the conspiracy. She spoke of her accomplice not as partner, but as tool, an easily manipulated follower who carried out instructions without question. Maya needed the world to understand this was her achievement, her act of will. The confession was recorded on video, capturing stark contrast between her youthful appearance and ancient cold-blooded nature of her words. She was a 17-year-old girl with predator's eyes, calmly articulating a philosophy where human life was disposable if it interfered with her desires. The sheer lack of remorse was most terrifying aspect. She spoke of murder with emotional investment one might have for tidying a room. "We should have used different cleaning agent for the floors," she mused at one point, as if offering advice to future killers. "The ammonia smell is always a giveaway if you don't air the place out for at least 12 hours. This dispassionate self-assessment was beyond chilling, clearest evidence of a mind that viewed murder as craft to be perfected. When confession was finally over, Maya leaned back in her chair, looking satisfied, as if she'd just completed a challenging exam with flying colors. She asked for a soda, tone casual. The request, so mundane and inappropriate, was final jarring reminder of her complete, terrifying detachment from reality. As prosecutors built their case, they tasked Detective Martinez with digging deeper into Maya's life, searching for origins of the monster who'd confessed with such pride. Beneath the surface of her chilling arrogance, they suspected lay a story that could explain, though never excuse, the darkness within her. The picture that emerged was one of profound, sustained neglect, a childhood devoid of stability and affection necessary for healthy development. Her home wasn't sanctuary, but place of quiet chaos, presided over by transient figures and caregivers who were at best indifferent, at worst actively hostile. Interviews with former neighbors and school officials painted heartbreaking portrait of a child who'd essentially raised herself. They spoke of young Maya, who was often unkempt, hungry, and desperate for any attention, positive or negative. She was ghost in the system, a child who slipped through cracks of social services and school counseling. Detectives uncovered evidence of physical abuse from one caregiver who'd used pain and intimidation as primary discipline tools. More profoundly was evidence of deep psychological abuse. Maya had been relentlessly belittled, told she was worthless, made to feel like a burden her entire life. This constant emotional battery had eroded her capacity for empathy and taught her that manipulation and aggression were the only effective means of survival and control. This information presented complex challenge for prosecution. While it didn't mitigate crime horror, it provided context blurring clean lines between monstrous perpetrator and damaged victim. The defense would seize upon this history, arguing Maya wasn't born monster, but created by a system and family that catastrophically failed her. Prosecutor Jessica Harper knew she'd have to navigate this delicate territory carefully, acknowledging tragedy of Maya's upbringing while refusing to let it become excuse for Rebecca Morrison's murder. Maya's obsessive need for control, so evident in her relationship with Emma and chilling confession, could now be seen as twisted reflection of her own powerless upbringing. Having been denied any sense of agency or safety throughout childhood, she'd become pathologically driven to control her environment and people in it. The obsessive friendship wasn't just friendship, it was lifeline, a kingdom of her own making where she held all power. And she'd killed to protect that kingdom. As trial date approached, Maya began a new, deeply unsettling performance. The cold, arrogant confessor was replaced by theatrical ploys designed to manipulate the court and sow doubt about her mental and physical state. The first audacious ploy occurred at a hearing to determine confession admissibility. Maya arrived not on her own feet, but being pushed in wheelchair, thick blanket covering her legs. She slumped in the chair, expression vacant, thin line of drool occasionally escaping her mouth. It was shocking transformation. Sudden dramatic portrayal of person physically and mentally incapacitated. A fragile, broken child completely detached from surroundings. The sudden disability was transparent, deeply cynical attempt to gain sympathy and bolster potential insanity. Defense. Her defense attorney argued Maya's mental state had deteriorated rapidly in custody, suggesting confession was product of psychotic break. Prosecutor Harper wasn't surprised or impressed. She'd anticipated Maya's manipulative tendencies would find new outlet. Instead of engaging directly, she simply requested court-ordered medical and psychiatric evaluation by neutral expert. It was calm, strategic move that called Maya's bluff. The evaluation results were swift and damning. The court-appointed doctor found absolutely no medical basis for Maya's physical symptoms. He concluded she was in perfect health and her condition was clear case of malingering, faking illness for secondary gain. The psychiatrist's report was scathing, describing her performance as conscious, deliberate attempt to deceive the court, noting her profound lack of consistency when she believed she wasn't being observed. In the following hearing, Harper calmly read excerpts from the psychiatrist's report into the record. As she did, Maya, still in wheelchair, listened intently. When Harper finished, Maya slowly lifted her head, and for the first time that day, a flash of her old, arrogant smirk returned. It was silent admission of defeat on this particular tactic, but also defiant promise that more games were to be played. The first trial day drew crowds of media and concerned Savannah residents filling every courthouse seat. Maya, now stripped of wheelchair prop, walked to defendant's table with confident stride, face a mask of detached indifference. She'd chosen her new role, the misunderstood, stoic victim of a biased system. The central conflict was established before the first witness was called. The defense argued passionately for the case to move to juvenile court, while prosecution insisted Maya must be tried as adult for such heinous act. Maya's defense attorney painted picture of troubled adolescent, product of traumatic upbringing who lacked emotional and psychological maturity to be held to adult standards. He stressed juvenile system was created precisely for these cases where rehabilitation potential should outweigh punishment desire. Prosecutor Harper countered, voice calm but firm. She argued crime nature and manner transcended childhood boundaries. She detailed meticulous planning, calculated cruelty, and profound lack of remorse characterizing Rebecca Morrison's murder. The law makes distinction for children, Harper stated, eyes fixed on jury, because we assume lack of maturity, capacity for poor judgment. But when a 17-year-old plans murder, recruits accomplice, and carries out execution with this level of sadism and foresight, she forfeits childhood protections. She's demonstrated adult capacity for evil, and she must face adult capacity for justice. The judge ruled in prosecution's favor. He cited extreme violence and significant premeditation as primary factors in his decision to keep trial in adult criminal court. Collective quiet sigh of relief could be heard from where Rebecca Morrison's family sat. For them, this was first small step toward justice that felt appropriate for horror scale. With that foundational issue settled, opening statements began. Maya's lawyer continued leaning on her traumatic past theme, preparing jury for defense built on sympathy foundation and psychological mitigation. He portrayed her not as evil, but as broken, a victim lashing out in the only way she knew how. Harper used her opening statement to frame the case in stark, uncompromising terms. She walked jury through Rebecca Morrison's final day, painting vivid picture of loving mother whose world was about to shatter. She then detailed cold, calculated steps Maya took to end that life. We will not allow the defendant to use her own tragic past as shield, Harper declared. Because on the day she murdered Rebecca Morrison, she was not a child. She was a predator. And this trial is about holding that predator accountable. With trial underway, Harper began constructing her case brick by evidentiary brick. She started with foundational elements, first responder testimony, medical examiner's grim findings, heartbreaking accounts from Rebecca's friends and family painting portrait of vibrant life senselessly extinguished. But Harper knew to secure conviction against defendant who'd be portrayed as sympathetic abuse victim, She needed evidence that was irrefutable and visceral. She needed to show jury the cold, calculating mind behind youthful facade. The moment that shifted trial atmosphere from tragic narrative to chilling, undeniable premeditation came with testimony of police department's digital forensics expert. He'd been tasked with analyzing laptop and phone seized from Maya's bedroom, methodically detailing how he'd recovered deleted data treasure trove. In this digital ghost world, prosecution found its most damning evidence. The killer's search history, presented to jury on large screen, told story of methodical, morbid research in weeks and days leading to murder. Jury sat in stunned silence as Maya's Google searches were displayed. The phrases were blueprint for crime, step-by-step guide to committing perfect homicide, researched with diligence of students studying for final exam. Searches began innocuously enough, queries about legal concepts like emancipation for minors and restraining order requirements. But they quickly descended into far darker territory. Jury saw searches for how to pick a simple lock, best way to disable home security camera, and common household items that can be used as garrote. Each search term corresponded directly to crime element, painting clear picture of meticulously planned and researched murder. Most shocking revelations were searches Maya conducted in final 72 hours before attack. Queries so monstrous, they elicited audible gasps from gallery. Phrases like, "How long does it take to bleed out from neck wound? Does bleach really destroy all DNA evidence?" and "least painful way to die versus most painful" flashed across screen. These weren't searches of confused child lashing out in passion. They were cold, detached queries of killer studying her craft. Harper had forensics expert walk jury through timeline, linking each search to specific action Maya took during crime. Search for how to muffle screams was made just 2 days before murder. Query for how much force to break hyoid bone was time-stamped evening before Rebecca Morrison was killed. Digital trail was horrifying echo of violence to come, proving beyond doubt murder wasn't spontaneous act, but culmination of deliberate, obsessive project. Maya's defense attorney tried mitigating damage during cross-examination, suggesting these were idle curiosities of teenager with morbid imagination influenced by crime shows. He argued there was no way to prove searches were part of concrete plan rather than dark fantasy. However, sheer volume and specificity of queries made this argument feel weak and desperate. It was one thing to be curious about crime, another to research precise methods you'd then use to kill specific person. As search history was detailed, Maya sat at defendant's table watching screen with unnerving placidity. No sign of shame or surprise on her face. Instead, she seemed almost proud, as if impressed by thoroughness of her own research being laid bare. Her lack of reaction was itself powerful testimony. It communicated complete absence of remorse and profound disconnect from horror of her actions. For jury, search history was turning point. It provided window directly into Maya's mindset in days before murder. And what they saw was chilling. A teenager who dedicated herself to project of lethal violence. Evidence transformed case from question of why she'd done it to undeniable confirmation of how she'd planned it. After prosecution rested its case, having built what seemed insurmountable evidence mountain, defense began difficult task. Their strategy was clear: pivot away from undeniable crime facts and focus entirely on defendant's psychological state. Centerpiece was testimony of highly paid psychological expert who'd explain how lifetime of abuse had shaped Maya into person she'd become. The expert, renowned psychiatrist with long list of academic credentials, took stand and began weaving compelling narrative of trauma and its devastating effects. He spoke eloquently about complex PTSD, attachment disorders, and ways chronic childhood neglect can fundamentally alter human brain development. He explained Maya's inability to feel empathy, obsessive need for control, and capacity for violence weren't signs of inherent evil, but predictable symptoms of horrific abuse she'd endured. He argued she was, in essence, victim of psychological wound, so deep it had crippled her moral compass. Testimony was powerful and for a time seemed to resonate. Psychiatrist presented Maya not as monster, but as deeply damaged individual. He suggested when Maya killed Rebecca Morrison, she wasn't acting from malice, but from distorted, trauma-induced survival instinct. It was narrative designed to transform jury's condemnation into reluctant, sorrowful understanding. Then it was Harper's turn to cross-examine. She approached witness Stan not with aggression, but with quiet, methodical precision. She began by acknowledging psychiatrist's expertise and expressing sorrow for undeniable hardships of Maya's childhood. This initial approach disarmed witness, creating false security, before she began meticulously deconstructing his entire testimony. Harper's cross-examination was masterclass in legal strategy. She didn't challenge trauma science, but focused on experts' application of that science to this specific defendant. She brought up Maya's calculated efforts to deceive court, such as fake disability in wheelchair. Doctor, Harper asked calmly, is sophisticated multi-day effort to malinger severe illness, complete with faked symptoms, consistent with person who lacks capacity to understand consequences or manipulate others? Psychiatrist was forced to concede it was not. Turning point came when Harper shifted questioning to experts' own evaluation of defendant. She methodically walked him through diagnostic criteria for psychopathy, a term he'd conspicuously avoided in direct testimony. She listed traits one by one: pathological need for control, grandiose sense of self-worth, lack of empathy, manipulative disposition. With each criterion, Harper presented evidence from case. Obsessive control over Emma. Proud bragging confession to police. Attempt to fake disability. Contemptuous treatment of own lawyer. For each point she asked, is this behavior consistent with that trait, doctor? Reluctantly, and with growing discomfort, expert was forced to answer yes again and again. Defense attorney objected repeatedly, but judge overruled each time, allowing prosecutor to continue. Harper wasn't putting words in witness's mouth. She was forcing him to confront logical conclusions of his own expertise when applied to overwhelming evidence. Witness, who'd been so confident moments before, began to stammer, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling under weight of Maya's own documented actions. Final exchange was devastating. Harper asked, Doctor, based on evidence we've reviewed, meticulous planning, sadistic confession, complete lack of remorse, and consistent manipulative behavior, would you agree that while defendant's traumatic past is a significant factor, her overall psychological profile is also highly consistent with clinical definition of psychopath? Courtroom was silent. Psychiatrist, trapped by his own professional ethics and undeniable facts, hesitated for a long moment before finally answering in low voice, yes, it is consistent. That single admission eviscerated core of defense strategy. They'd hoped to present Maya's trauma as sole explanation for her actions, to frame her as pure victim of circumstance. Instead, their own expert had been forced to concede another, more sinister label also fit: psychopath. As expert stepped down, damage was irreparable. He'd been called to build sympathy bridge to jury, but Harper had turned him into prosecution's most powerful witness, inadvertently validating prosecution's entire theory. Maya Chun was not scared child who'd lost control but cunning, remorseless manipulator who'd been in control every single step. Maya watched exchange with flicker of anger in her eyes, her placid mask slipping for first time. She wasn't angry at prosecutor who destroyed her defense. She was angry at expert witness who had, in her view, betrayed her. Defense case was in shambles, not because of surprise witness or forensic evidence, but because defendant's own character was so profoundly malignant it couldn't be explained away, even by most sympathetic expert. As trial moved toward inevitable conclusion, proceedings took turn from clinical evidence analysis to raw human cost of Maya Chen's actions. It was time for victim impact statements, moment when court is compelled to listen not to language of law, but language of grief. Rebecca's husband was first to speak, voice thick with emotion he struggled to control. He spoke of small, everyday moments he now missed with aching clarity. Sound of her laughter in mourning, way she'd hum while gardening, comfort of her presence at end of long day. His statement wasn't cry for vengeance, but quiet, devastating portrait of life partner stolen from him, future that had been meticulously planned, then suddenly, violently erased. Next came Rebecca's mother, frail woman whose grief seemed to physically weigh her down. She spoke of day Rebecca was born, joy of raising daughter who was kind and compassionate from earliest years. She described lifetime of love and pride now forever tainted by horrific manner of her daughter's death. But most powerful, heart-wrenching moment came when Harper, as part of final presentation to jury, revealed evidence that had been held back until this point. Not weapon or crime scene photograph. A simple spiral-bound notebook, Rebecca Morrison's personal journal. Harper explained that inside Rebecca would occasionally write letters to her future self, documenting hopes, dreams, aspirations. With judge's permission, Harper announced she would read final entry written just 1 week before Rebecca was murdered. Harper's voice was steady but imbued with solemnity, commanding absolute attention. Words she was about to read were, in essence, voice from beyond grave. "Dear future Rebecca," letter began, and hush fell over room. "I hope by the time you read this, you've finally taken that trip to Italy we've been talking about for years. I hope you've seen Venice canals and eaten pasta until you couldn't move. I hope Emma is happy and thriving in high school, and we've successfully navigated these tricky teenage years. I worry about her so much sometimes about the world she's growing up in, but I know our love will be her anchor." Letter continued, filled with mundane but beautiful hopes of life in progress. Rebecca wrote about wanting to plant lemon tree in backyard, her goal to run half marathon, excitement about growing old with her husband. Each sentence was small vibrant thread in rich tapestry, a future she'd fully expected to live. As Harper read, emotional weight became almost unbearable. Jurors were seen wiping tears. Even stone-faced bailiffs seemed affected by profound sadness of moment. Letter devastatingly brought Rebecca Morrison back to life in courtroom, her personality, warmth, and dreams filling space she'd been violently removed from. Final lines were most poignant. "Most of all, future Rebecca," Harper read, her own voice cracking slightly for first time. "I hope you never forget how lucky you are. I hope you've cherished every sunrise, every hug from Emma, every quiet moment. Life is so fragile and so beautiful. Never, ever take it for granted." Letter ended there. Harper closed journal and placed it gently on evidence table, its presence now sacred, sorrowful monument. Courtroom was utterly silent for a full minute, echo of Rebecca's own words hanging in air. Letter had done more than humanize victim. It had magnified crime scale to almost infinite degree. Maya Chen hadn't just taken life. She'd stolen 1,000 future sunrises, million quiet moments, lifetime of unrealized dreams. She destroyed not just person, but entire world. During reading, Maya remained impassive, staring at fixed point on far wall, refusing to look at jury or Rebecca's grieving family. Her detachment in face of such overwhelming emotion was perhaps most damning testimony of all. Final silent confirmation of soulless, void prosecution had described. Reading of letter was breaking point for jury and everyone who witnessed it. Trial ceased to be intellectual exercise in weighing evidence and became visceral, emotional reckoning. There was no longer any question about verdict, only heavy, sorrowful weight of waiting for it to be made official. Just when trial seemed to hold no more shocks, prosecution called one final unannounced rebuttal witness. Move caught defense entirely by surprise. Witness was 16-year-old girl who'd once been part of Maya's small, insular circle of friends. She approached stand nervously, eyes darting toward defendant's table with mixture of fear and resolve. Her testimony would provide last horrifying puzzle piece, revealing motives so twisted and depraved it made all previous explanations seem inadequate. The girl, under Harper's gentle but firm questioning, began describing secret world Maya had constructed around herself and closest followers. It was world built on foundation of shared grievances, nihilistic philosophy, and profound sense of superiority over rest of society. Maya was undisputed leader of this small clique, her charisma and intelligence holding other teenagers in thrall. They looked up to her, feared her, and above all sought her approval. Witness then revealed core of this secret world, series of escalating games or challenges Maya would devise. These games were designed to test loyalty and prove their collective contempt for societal rules. They started small with petty vandalism and shoplifting, but quickly grew more serious and dangerous. Participation wasn't optional. To refuse one of Maya's games was to risk being cast out and becoming new target of group's cruelty. Then came final devastating revelation. Witness tearfully confessed murder of Rebecca Morrison was the ultimate game. Rebecca hadn't been killed simply because she was obstacle to friendship. She'd been selected as target for far more sinister purpose. Maya had presented her murder as group's final, most audacious challenge. According to Witness, Maya had framed the Rebecca problem as test of their commitment to their own twisted code. She'd turned murder into competition, bet to see if they had courage to truly defy all society's laws. Witness admitted she and another friend had refused to participate, and as a result they'd been ostracized and threatened into silence by Maya. Accomplice who'd participated in murder had done so not just from loyalty, but from desperate, terrifying fear of what Maya would do if she refused. This testimony shifted entire crime understanding. Narrative of protective act to preserve friendship was revealed to be carefully constructed lie. Reality was infinitely more chilling. Rebecca Morrison wasn't just casualty of obsessive friendship. She was disposable pawn in sociopathic teenager's power trip. Human sacrifice to prove philosophical point. This revelation recontextualized every piece of evidence jury had heard. Methodical online research wasn't just preparation for single murder. It was Maya's study of game mechanics. Sadistic, bragging confession wasn't just display of remorselessness. It was Victor's speech, detailed account of how she'd won her own twisted contest. Even story of her abusive past was cast in new, more sinister light. She hadn't just been shaped by trauma. She'd weaponized it, using it as justification for her own self-created mythology of superiority. As Witness spoke, Maya stared at her with expression of pure, unadulterated hatred. Mask of calm indifference was completely gone, replaced by furious glare. It was most emotion jury had seen from her throughout entire trial, and it wasn't remorse or fear, but cold, hard rage of being exposed. Her carefully constructed narrative had been shattered, and she'd been revealed for what she truly was, not tragic victim, but petty, sadistic tyrant of microscopic kingdom. Testimony was bombshell that obliterated last vestiges of defense case. No way to spin this new information. No way to frame murder as anything other than cold-blooded, thrill-seeking act of nihilistic violence. Idea that Rebecca Morrison had died as consequence of bet was so profoundly offensive, so deeply monstrous, that it solidified jury's resolve in way no amount of forensic evidence could. When Harper finished questioning, she had no further statements. She simply let weight of witnesses' final revelation settle over courtroom. True motive, in all its sickening triviality, had been laid bare. Murder of Rebecca Morrison wasn't tragedy born of desperation. It was hobby, sport, final bloody move in game where only one person knew rules because she'd made them all up. Jury was sent to deliberate, but everyone in courtroom knew it was formality. Jury returned with verdict in less than an hour, testament to overwhelming, unambiguous nature of evidence they'd been presented. Foreman, middle-aged man with grim, resolute expression, handed slip of paper to bailiff. As judge read verdict aloud, guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder. Wave of quiet, sorrowful relief washed over Rebecca Morrison's family. No cheers, only soft sound of weeping. Tears of family that had received justice, but would never receive what they truly wanted. Their beloved Rebecca back. Maya Chun, upon hearing verdict, showed no emotion. She simply nodded once, as if acknowledging expected, if inconvenient outcome. Her mask of cold indifference was back in place, posture erect and defiant. Days later, court reconvened for sentencing hearing. Room was packed again. Savannah community gathered to witness final chapter of horrific saga. Harper argued for maximum possible sentence, life in prison without parole. She recounted chilling crime details, sadistic confession, and final damning revelation that Rebecca's life had been taken as part of twisted game. The defendant is predator, Harper concluded. And for this community's safety, she must be permanently removed from it. Defense attorney made final impassioned plea for leniency, once again invoking specter of Maya's abusive childhood. He argued life without parole for 17-year-old was cruel and unusual punishment, sentence abandoning all hope of rehabilitation. He asked judge to see damaged child beneath monstrous facade and offer sentence allowing possibility, however remote, of eventual redemption. It was plea for mercy in case defined by its absolute absence. Then judge offered Maya opportunity to make final statement. She stood, handcuffed in front of her, and surveyed courtroom with calm, deliberate gaze. She ignored her lawyer's frantic whispers to remain silent. For a moment, it seemed she might offer apology, single word of remorse that might grant sliver of peace to victim's family. Instead, what came was one last shocking act of defiance. Her statement wasn't one of remorse, but contempt. She spoke of her own superiority, of her disappointment in world too weak to understand her. She didn't apologize for murder. She rationalized it as necessary act of will. Then, turning her head slightly, she looked directly at Rebecca Morrison's weeping husband and offered small, chilling smirk. It was